Hello everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. My name is Sanjeev Jain, and I'm your host today. We have a very interesting discussion today, which is not spoken enough, and we are going to, talk about it, which is new masculinity and breaking stereotype. That's a very interesting subject, close to my heart, and we have three very different experts from different fields doing different things and with hopefully different views on this topic. So first thing first, let me introduce my experts and panelists here. So first is Amulya. Amulya Shah. So he's based in Noida. I had the fortune of working with him for a few years together when we were in HCL. A very talented person, and I think as HR person, he's one person who has a point of view, right? I mean, he always is very well read, very wise, and has a point of view on different topics, including masculinity. And I will not talk about many other talents that he has, but last 2 decades plus, he has been a strategic HR. He has global experience, and DI is his passion. So thank you, Amulya, for joining in.
Thank you. Pleasure.
All right. And then we have Simran O'Brien, who has been into advisory, consulting and advisory for more than 2 decades. She's working with Aon Learning Center, and she has led and being a key part of multiple streams within consulting, including learning. DEI has been her passion. And, I recently got to know her, and I can see her excitement and energy about this topic and various other topics on diversity and inclusion for the corporates. So thank you, Simran, for joining in.
Thank you, Sanjeev, for having me here.
All right, and then we have Vishal, which I would say I've been told is a poster child of new masculinity. So we'll learn a little more about it. And Vishal today is joining from Goa, and he is doing something interesting. He's co-founder and CEO of Meta Social, which is a firm which is helping social change through technology. So they're helping a lot of lot of organizations which are involved in social development through technology. And we'd like to hear a little more from him what he does. So Vishal, would you mind sharing what you do? I mean, this sounds little very interesting. You're helping social development through technology. What do you do?
Yeah. Jeff, first of all, thanks for having me here. Very interesting, I think, theme and topic, something close to my heart as well. And interestingly, it aligns with what we are doing in MetaSocial as well. So what we
Okay.
started at Meta was really a kind of streamlining the philanthropic journey of an organization, right, from the CSR to an employee engagement. But I think in the last 1 year, we have been talking to a lot of CHROs, and we found employee engagement and DEI is one of the key elements, because sometimes organizations look at social as just CSR, which is external, but there are multifold in terms of social. Is sustainability is also social. CSR on ground, community work is social. So is DEI, right? The internal working of an organization, how you address diversity and things. So we actually stitch all this together through technology and give a kind of a model to execute that across these three thematics. And one of them happens to be DEI, which is where I think we're discussing today.
Excellent, excellent. So we'll learn a little more about it. Thank you very much. And let me also introduce my partner and co-founder with Enabling World, Sushil Tayal. He's based out of Bangalore, and uh, together, we are running this boutique organization. So let me introduce Enabling World in just a minute. So Enabling World is now we are celebrating 12th year now. It's a boutique HR consulting firm that Sushil started. He's my class fellow and my partner. So we are doing it together, and we are focused on multiple areas, which are quite a few areas for a small organization. But we do some niche work in HR consulting, into leadership talent development. DEI is in the center by design, because we do a lot of work. We are passionate about diversity and inclusion, including, and not limiting to gender diversity. We are interested and passionate about various spectrum of diversity, whether it's a neurodiversity or person with disability or gender, or or different aspects of diversity, or LGBTQI. So we are committed and passionate about that. We do a little bit of outsourcing, but we do a lot of work around employee well-being. And I think when I, in my last few years, when I see employee well-being and DI, they're quite connected actually, because both feed into each other. So we thought, we will focus on that as well. So that's very briefly about us. So let's get straight into the session, and a few ground rules for thanks to audience. First of all, let me welcome all the audience who have joined today. And thanks, Rupa, for joining as well. Rupa is another expert on DI that we leverage very often, and she has very informed views about masculinity. So Rupa, just feel free to chip in wherever you want. And then thanks to all the audience who have joined in today. Let this be a very interactive session. Uh, I mean, this is a subject that we all are learning together. None of us can say that we are perfect in this. So through this dialogue, what we want to attempt is to break some myths and be a little more informed about what does it mean, how the new masculinity is shaping up, evolving, what can we do about it, both men and women. And our focus will be more on the workplace, right? I mean, of course, it has an impact and implication in the society, but I think our focus will be a little more laser focused at the workplace, because that's what our audience is all about. So audience, feel free to contribute. There's a chat. Put your comments, and to the experts, Amulya, Vishal, and Simran and Rupa, feel free to comment on the chat parallelly, because whenever you see you feel like commenting, so do that, and we'll keep like a conversation. And we have about not a lot of time for this topic, just about 90 minutes, and we'll try to stay focused on that. So with that, so let's begin. So where do we begin? So Simran, let me start with you. uh, can you first of all, in this word we all hear masculinity, new masculinity, but what is masculinity to you? Is it a gender? It is the trait that are associated with men? So would you unpack it for us to start with, so that we are all on the same page?
Sure. So that's actually a wonderful question, Sanjeev. And I think what you've sort of started with is that you're right. Typically, what we think of when we think of masculinity, we think of gender. We think of certain traits associated with that gender. But to my view, and this is entirely what I think, to my view, masculinity it's a concept, okay, and it's a notion that exists. For all of us to work within. So just like we have we've got over the years and over the decades, we've got formulated gender roles, right? And each of those gender roles actually has a notion behind it. So what I think of masculinity as is it's a concept, it's a notion that has certain traits around it, and those traits or no, and that notion itself is undergoing change. Okay,
Mhm.
so that notion itself is actually being challenged constantly in our current scenario, and which is essentially why we're talking about it today. But that is where I would possibly peg it in terms of a definition.
All right.
So,
Vishal, I mean, since this we are starting, Amulya, maybe
yeah.
you want to add to
So,
this. What's your
yeah.
understanding
So,
of masculinity?
yeah. So I just learning because masculinity will have different connotation to different cultures and different regions and different people. So when you're talking about cultural context, it will all depend upon what kind of culture we are coming from, whether it is
Mhm.
old, new, Western, Oriental. India itself will have massive, I think Vishal will add to it. And which societies do we belong to? So we all know in India, if you are from let's say Bishnoi community, I'm just adding to it so that you know what is happening there, or from Khap Panchayat, or deep down in the villages you have. But then there are evolved societies where you'll find both genders, femininity and masculinity actually at the similar level. So you talk about different groups of people in those societies, right? And the
Mhm.
second one important is their behaviors, where they are coming from, their languages, what kind of languages they use. So as Simran has said, masculinity has different connotation, and we understand it's not from female or a male gender, it's unisex. So masculinity can have this way or that way to start with. Vishal.
Yeah, very interesting. I think cultures and is something I kind of relate to and bring in both on the professional and personal. And while I said I'm from Goa, and Goa is relatively modern, and you should expect
Mhm.
modern men in Goa, and it has changed over the last 20-25 years. But when I started my career or before that, just two stories, I think, completely contrasting. My father, when he said real man should be tough, stoic, and unemotional, right? And you need to take care of your sisters, my younger siblings, in terms of which is doing. And he himself was one of the first economics with honors in part of Goa in 60s. So you can imagine someone saying that, right? And that is what I came in. Luckily, I had a very good circle. My cousins were very open-minded in terms of this thing. And I come from a technology background. So when I came in, again, culture, I think what Amulya said is very important. People came from different places. And initially, especially technology companies, people, most of them were from rural, getting a first-time opportunity to come into a metro, and has certain roles defined, that a modern man versus a traditional man, what it is. And I think that is the difference, that what we have found. And it comes with that my role is to do this, and I should follow a certain traditional pattern. And I think that's what came in. But now, recently, in the last 5 or 10 years, as Gen Zs are coming, I see it evolving a lot, because the new generation has a more balanced this thing, right? Both from a role perspective and the emotional side of it, because another aspect is you are expected to be unemotional. And I think that's the major thing I see today.
So
as we
let me just trace back to history. I'll just take 1 minute. So
yeah,
male and
sure.
female, or so I'm a Roman Catholic by religion, my year. So if you go to Old Testament, it's written that God created Adam, right? And then from his bone, from the pelvic region, he created Eve. Okay, so he was very clear that both these genders are equal, right? But over the ages, if you track back to Stone Age, to agriculture, to industrial, to now knowledge workers, where different kind of people and prowess was needed. So if you were in Stone Age, you needed to be very strong, and so the males were stronger. They were going to hunt and all. When it came to agriculture, they were doing all the sowing and the cultivation and all, and the females were kept at home. But industrial also, you needed muscle power to actually get into what do you say, manufacturing, etc. But when it came to knowledge worker, is where everything exploded in a very, very tangential manner, right? So, and then everything started getting changes getting made, right? And more and more females started coming to the workplace as compared to a male. As of statistics, if you'll see, more females are getting graduates and postgraduates, right? So now is the time, if you look, things have changed, flipped, are diagonally opposite. So now things are becoming difficult for the male themselves rather than you talk about female. So we'll discover more when we are discussing with some more
Thank you.
questions
I think
and
that's
examples.
very, very interesting that you trace back to history, and because what we are today is an outcome of various over centuries, right? I mean, and we will not do a deep study on, how we have evolved there, but I think we are based on our circumstances, our situations, right? The key life turning episodes that we go through, and that is what has made us today what we are today. And it takes time to unlearn, to change, right? So that's very interesting journey. So Vishal, can you pick up three or four key traits of a stereotype, a traditional concept of a man? While we have spoken many things, but can you use three, four words to describe a traditional stereotype of masculinity? Positive or toxic, we'll not talk about it, but three, four words,
Yeah.
if you use, what those words would be.
I think three, four words. One is power hierarchy, because that's what you are traditionally looked at to
Okay.
look at.
Mhm.
Dismissive of certain feminine traits, not necessarily from women, but if you show, for example, another thing is vulnerability, right? It's dismissive of the fact that men should. It doesn't matter who's doing that in terms of this thing, right? And then I think the typical this thing is, I think, uh, the networks or the boys club that you talk about, right? Homogeneous
Mhm.
networks that end up or used to end up being created, I think, is a typical this thing that you see in a lot of organizations. Although I think the modern organizations have quite moved ahead from them, and that's the change is coming.
Simran, would you like to add few words, typical words which we associate with the traditional? And I think people on the call, uh,
Yeah.
why don't you also put in the chat what you think are the traditional concept of masculinity, right? Is it a caregiver, provider, dominant? Whatever the words come to your mind, put in the chat so that we are all together on this. Simran, would you like
Yeah.
to share a few words that
Yes.
describe?
Yeah, sure. So I think, so I think one of the things is that we expect the expectation, or actually that's the image that has been created, is that they are ambitious, competitive, that is typically what we associate with, men, or masculine traits that we see, that they will tend to be like that. They are also expected to sort of, like I think Vishal also mentioned, not show too much emotion. So we are saying that, emotional expression should be very controlled, very restrained. That's typically what we've associated with men. Also, in terms of decision making, the association is that they are quick, fast decision makers. So they
That's
will they will take a decision very fast and quickly, and risk taking. Okay. So
Mm.
they will take on risk faster. Also, the onus, and that every I think one of the big things is that every man wants to be a leader. So I think the automatic assumption is that leadership qualities come from there. So I think these are
we just
certain
heard
things that
we
I would
just
think.
heard the we just heard the news from US, right? So I mean, in the history they never had a woman as president, right? I mean, we
Yeah.
lost another opportunity, right? So I'm not
Yes.
in favor or against anyone. I'm not
Yeah.
saying anything,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
just in evolved society, there's never been a woman president. We lost another opportunity to do that, right? So
Mhm.
anyway, that's besides the point. We'll not go there. Thank you very much for all the comments that people are making: dominating, aggressive, leadership,
Mm.
power, hungry, right? Always in control.
Right.
Absolutely, absolutely correct, right? And you can imagine the Atlas, the picture of Atlas. The world's burden is on men, right? That's what men are made to believe, and men believe if they are not there, the world heavens will fall, right? So everything what is happening is because of them. So that's a
And
default, right?
and another thing that defines, I just put in because people will remember Amitabh Bachchan's movie Mard. कि मर्द को दर्द नहीं होता.
Correct, correct. So those
And
who don't
men
understand,
don't cry because I think
Yeah.
that's reverberates in my mind कि boss इनको ऐसे ही दिखता है. But nowadays real men cry.
Yeah.
cry. And I can't resist but share with you the my favorite player, Roger Federer, when he was retiring. I'm sure a lot of you would
Yeah.
relate to that picture. I cannot forget that. He's the one who'll always cry if he wins or he loses, right? And he says, I'm going to cry. It's going to become difficult for me. And he has dealt with it beautifully. And he doesn't feel shy about it. He says, I'm going to cry. That's okay, right? And not only him, but his biggest competitor, Rafael Nadal. I
Nadal.
mean, Nadal was also crying along with him. I mean, that's such a beautiful picture. I will never forget that frame where both of
Mm.
them, great players in the world, and for
True.
decades they've been ruling the world of tennis, and they
Yeah.
both are
Mm.
crying at this emotional moment, right? So that's amazing. So, Amelia, coming to you, can you
Mm.
paint a picture of a modern man or a manhood? What
Yeah.
you see, paint picture in a
Right. So
simple words, where the
very,
shift
very
is
simple.
happening, where is the shift is happening?
I'll take 2 minutes. So we have also traversed our journey from where we were studying in all boys school, all female school to co-ed school, and that's where a lot of things changed, right? And in all boys school, you have to show that yeah, you are the strength, you have the most strength, you're this, you're that. But I think over the last 10, 20 years, when people started moving to co-ed school and we started having your classmates as female, they also are competitive and all. We saw that today you see that the real men are one side emotionally balanced. They can show their emotions when the time is right. They also look at diversity in a very, very different way, which we used to look at, or your female gender, your female friends that you look at. They also look at inclusivity. So whether they are doing a project, whether they are making a team, they are very, very conscious of the fact that you have to ensure that you have the inclusivity built in. They are open to taking suggestions without having any kind of thing that it's coming for a female or an LGBT or anything that we're talking about. And of course, they are very agile when it comes to technology, and they have this sustainability mindset. आज के
Ah,
डेट में अपने बेटे से बात करोगे तो आप बोलेगा पापा आप ये पटाखे मत जलाओ पापा, ये पेड़ ऐसे मत करो आप, वो आगे चल के क्या होगा. So I don't think we were thinking like that, and that defines the new genre of people who are coming and talking about what is happening next 20 years or 30 years.
So
That's my bit.
there's a saying, child is the father of man, right? And
Right.
I think there is a lot, and this is so exciting and a positive thing in the society, that the new
Mm,
generation, Gen Z, millennial that you talk
mm,
about, they're the
mm,
one who are defining and correcting many of us
mm,
actually. And
mm.
not to be harsh to ourselves, because we are outcome of what we have experienced and seen and been taught, right? But I think the new generation has seen much more of it, and then we are learning from them. So that's very heartening thing, very, very heartening thing. So I think the audience on the call, feel free to put in your words of where do you see is a modern man, right? What are some words that come to your mind when you think about a modern man? As we say, empathetic and, participative in
Caring.
the parenting, caring, right? I mean, a lot of things are coming. So feel free to put your comments on the chat.
If I may just add, beyond the workplace, right, from a modern man perspective, I think I could think of three things, which I think, and especially the young generation that we have seen, I think they are looking to break down social stigma, right? What was traditionally kind of been
Yeah.
there. And the second is care, or rather self care. They're very
Mm.
open to well being, for their well being, looking at therapy, mindfulness, and others, which was not there in our generation. We were just work, and do that, right? And last, what I've seen, and which I think for us to quite some time to evolve to that, is cultivating the emotional intelligence, right? In terms of really being able to understand, manage, and express that for us. But this generation goes beyond and saying, also empathize with others, because it's not just about, and it's not about genders, it's actually empathizing, because as you spoke about the tennis stars that we saw, and I think even the Farrell speech and all the matches both of them played, it was always the emotions, they took it on their sleeve, right? And we see that. And I think modern man or modern workplaces or otherwise, we see this quite openly being expressed, which was not the case earlier.
I was just reminded of Vishal very recently. Let me just share. I mean, we all are vulnerable today, right? We'll all expose and share our stories. That's how the best way to learn from each other is. Recently, I was at Jodhpur attending a personal wedding ceremony, destination wedding, as you call it, right? So part of
Mm.
that, I'm very emotional, and I don't, I'm not shy about it. So I'm what am I? So my kid will say, "Now Papa will cry," right? So when the critical moment come, when they're exchanging vows, right, and the girl is crying tears. So it was the bride and it was me in the whole event, who had
Mm.
tears in the eyes. And I mean, the reaction from
Yeah.
the group there was, some appreciated, yes, this person has emotion, right? Some could had a ridicule in their eyes. I could see from their glance, say, "Hey, come, you're a man. How could you cry?" Right? So that's where we are. And I think
Yeah.
the biggest issue that we see, the harm, and we'll talk about Simran with you, particularly, we'll start the harmful effect of the traditional stereotype of a man, right?
Yeah.
What are the implications? What are the impact?
Yes.
Harmful, mostly, is on men and others, is what I think is the next that we want to get into. So can you start that discussion?
Yeah.
The
Sure.
traditional words that you all shared, the traditional concept of a manhood or the
Yeah.
masculinity, right? Uh, what impact it has specifically on men, right? Is
Yes.
it the fitness, mental, physical, trauma, stress? What does it lead to, first of all, right? And then we'll talk about how do we deal with that.
Yeah. So, in fact, taking on from that discussion, I'll just share a saying which I heard many years ago. And what it said was that they were talking about Mother's Day, like we have these different days, right? So, Mother's Day, and they said mother as a word is not a noun, it's a verb. Okay. And so, which is where, I started thinking that actually that's so true. Like, we always associate a certain trait and we make it a noun, we make it symbolic of a particular gender, but we
Mhm.
forget that it's actually an action. It's actually, the way it's done. Okay. And
Wow.
that connects to the emotion. So, which is why, I think what you brought up is very important, Sanjeev, because what we're saying here is that stereotypes, just as they impact women, All right, there's a huge impact on men because there are many things like, so I think we had raised this earlier that, where men feel that anxiety to perform or fit into a box because of societal expectations. Okay,
Mm.
because again, they are expected to be primary earners. They are also expected to sort of take on leadership roles. What if they didn't want to? Right, what if that role actually led them to, they're forced to take that because that's the perception about them, and therefore they felt inadequate because they
Mm.
kept that, that pressure to constantly prove yourself, the pressure to constantly be productive, the constant, the impact of being judged for small things like, okay, I'm taking a day off to be with my children,
Mm.
or I'm, leaving early to pick up my child from school. Very small things, right? But there is so much of impact that this has on the overall way a person perceives themselves. Okay,
In fact,
and that becomes
even
very different. Yeah,
if I can
sorry.
add on, great
Yeah,
point.
please.
A lot of progressive organizations today, and Amulya, you are, senior HR leader, you have led organizations as a leadership team, and especially from the people function, and Vishal, I'm sure you have done that as well. Now, they have parental leaves, for example, right? Isn't it? Many of the organizations. And statistics say that a lot of men, even if they are entitled to parenting leave, they are
Yes.
reluctant to take it. Not that they don't want to take it or they need to take it, just because of the social stigma. Log kya kahenge, right? How will it
Mm.
be seen? And typically it is seen as, oh, you're taking parental leave, right?
Yeah.
You are
Yeah.
enjoying that. I mean,
Yeah.
the kind of comment, the kind of glance that you see at the workplace is something that, while it is entitled, you should not be taking, right? So that's the kind of environment and stigma that we live in, right? Even if
Yeah.
policies are changing, but we will take a long time before it becomes an accepted norm. That is where we have an issue. So I think what you're saying is the impact it has, that it puts a lot of stress and pressure on typical on a man, the traditional concepts, and that
Yes.
lead to a lot of maybe pent up emotions within,
Yes.
and lot of pressure to prove something which he
Yeah.
may not be
So
ready for example, right?
yeah,
Correct. Correct. Absolutely.
suppressed emotions. So when I was doing some research on this topic, and also I came through a book which a guy from UK has written, Richard Reeves, and that is called Of Boys and Men. So I don't know how many of you have heard
Would you
about
put
it.
that in the chat also after you've spoken, so that
Yes, yes.
we all can
So
make
it
it
talks
after you've
about why
spoken?
modern male is struggling, why modern male is struggling, and why it matters what we do about it. So, statistics say that suicidal rates in male across the world is 4x than female. And in India, it is 2.5x. Worldwide, it is 4x. India, it is 2.5x. So, if you're talking about suppressed emotions and aggressions, male not conforming to the what they want to do, express themselves, take paternity leave, as you're saying, these are all going to bound up and pent up lot of stress, and that's why we are now seeing stuff like early heart problems, deaths, and suicides, even divorces, and statistics say that female survives better after divorce, but male they do not.
Because they're emotional, very dependent, right? I mean,
Emotional.
they
Yeah,
don't
and
express
even
it well.
even in couples, if you see, if you have been couple for 20 years, 25 years, if a male couple dies first, the females survive and they survive for long. But if the female partners are lost, you'll find that male either they get into alcoholism or something, or stress, or this or that, diabetes, and they actually die very fast. So statistically, maybe someday because of their genetic year, but most of them they are not able to sustain and live beyond certain period of time. So that means that yes, this is something that we have to talk about. This is something that we have to support in terms of not getting into that toxic masculinity that people talk about. Traditional कि हाँ भाई आप ऐसे हो तो ऐसे ही दिखाना है, सबके सामने नहीं रोना है, आप ही को, you are the breadwinner. I'll give you one example. I was shocked, and it was a cultural shock. Some
Sure,
10
please.
12 years 10 12 years back when I was in US through Samsung, so there were a lot of senior people, directors, and all. So typically, my way, I started talking, and then asking, and Americans, they don't diverge too much about their family. So there was a lady who was compound bed head for America. So I said, hello, this, that. So who all are there in your family? So she was surprised. Then she opened up after some time. Then she said that, yeah, I've got two kids and a husband who's a house husband. So
Hmm.
I was taken aback. What does she mean by house husband? Because I have never heard about house husband concept in India. Then she explained me, no, no, no. I work. He stays back at home and he takes care of the kids. Still, though I had traveled, I had worked or another 10, 12 years back, I also being a professional, seen all this. I was in the shock. So I can tell you that still when we talk about all these things, many of us, we will not accept and will not come forward to discuss about all these matters in open forum and then take corrective actions.
It is. I think this is not uncommon now. This
Yeah.
house husband concept, it's very
Yes.
common. Absolutely, we see many examples. So I think Vishal, coming to you, a very specific question is, what is the impact, since our focus, while there's an issue in the society, our specific focus will be at the workplace, implications at the workplace. What are implications of, maybe good or bad, of traditional concept of masculinity at the workplace in terms of various things? It could be the way other gender feels, the way the politics take place, the way the opportunities are given, what all happens. And you have been in a leadership position, you are running the organization, you are CEO. What do you see at the workplace? And I think team on the call, you can also put in the chat, we'll all learn from each other. What do you see are the impact of traditional stereotype of masculinity at the workplace? In simple words, if you can put, that'll be great participation. Yes, we shall go ahead.
Yeah. So I think the whole role about being an alpha male, and I think as panelists mentioned as well, uh, in terms of you're expected to be in a certain role, right? So it starts right from leadership, coming down and looking at the whole aspect of addressing this issue. So I think the first aspect that I have seen is there's a absolutely, either in an organization where it is working or not working, as a kind of a gender roles are not working, this thing is open dialogues. I've seen people are not very open to discuss about it, which is there. Second is there are policies around DI which it has a gender neutral this thing, but the implementation of that, right? Because again, it's the intent and the top down, because leadership styles have to show that. Are you
Mhm.
collaborative? Are you empathetic towards that? I've seen in some organizations which is missing, which is there. Second is in terms of leadership themselves showing that they are showing the power of vulnerability, right? That you can showcase your other side. In some of the leaders that I worked with were
Mhm.
missing, because probably they were either conscious because of the what you say, the societal norms, or some of them were not about societal norms. They just didn't know the challenges, the other side of challenges in terms of this, right? So there was no exposure, or and I think that's something which I have seen quite drastically in terms of that. So uh, mostly it's quite visible from top down in terms of how the policies are implemented. Are there open dialogues? Is there no allyship or mentorship given? For example, I mentioned about we all came from different rural and semi-urban setup to a metro to work in technology places. There was no guidance or things which is that this is kind of we were given
Mhm.
training on cultural, that I'm going to US, so I should behave in a certain way. Certain norms are there, but there was no
True.
guidance on this, or help on this, which was missing. And I think even today, although the there's a lot of evolvement which has happened, but in a formal shape, the guidance, the mentoring for the leaders, and especially one is top down, and second, the emerging leaders, that this is how it is kind of defined. This is how you could implement is missing.
So, Amulya, you have been into leadership positions in organizations, corporate. Very specific. What are the implications, maybe negative or positive, at the workplace because of this traditional concept of man? It has
So,
at the workplace. How does it manifest?
two things I'll just add, and then maybe Simran can take it forward. I think One is the gender inequality because they would prefer more male in their teams, and so that when they are making remarks and their sexist remarks because of their aggression and because of the kind of aura or that masculinity they have, they would not prefer having female, what say, team members, which can imbalance the right kind of teams that you're looking at. And then the second thing, of course, is
Very good.
the male, as you say, alpha male, I want to win. So that toxic competition can get into and crib into your teams or inter teams. Boss, मेरे को तो जीतना है, चाहे जो हाल में हो. Hook by crook, I have to win, which can then spiral into very unethical, non-integrity type of thing in the organization, which one has to avoid. So these are two things that I can see in play when you're talking about masculinity, the negative ones.
So, Simran, you work with a lot of organizations into as a consultant, as an advisor, right? From a great consulting organization like Aon. What have you seen specific implication of the typical stereotype at the workplace, right? On women or on men itself, right? I mean, because there are a lot of impact on men also. So what would
Yeah.
those be?
So I think primarily from the concept of masculinity, or how men typically, this concept of masculinity, how it sort of figures out in the workplace. Apart from what Amulya and Vishal have shared, I think one of the things I notice is that the way they communicate, okay, in their team in general, the tone of
Mhm.
communication, so the tonality itself, the kind of language that is used, all of that is a lot more dominant. All of that is a lot more, the idea is to be seen as a powerful authoritative figure. Okay, so all of the communication is designed to be a lot more aggressive from their end, if that is the
Mhm.
kind of culture that is typically present in the organization. And that obviously in essence then leads to them being more more what should I say, again adding on to what Amulya said, more competitive rather than collaborative. So when they have to take a decision, or when there is some, if it's for example in a consulting organization, you're talking about leading a project team, and then you're having a discussion or brainstorming as a fundamental concept also, it will not work out in a scenario like this, because there is no there is no dialogue. It's more
Mhm.
to do with personal, personal achievement, or being viewed as somebody who's who's in a position of authority, and therefore needs to do that not just only by by taking all the decisions in your team, but also ensuring that I know what is best. Like that's the vibe that will come out, that I
Mhm.
know what is the best thing to do. And therefore there is no conversation which leads to then a best case scenario. So in the organization's context also, it's a loss, because a perfect solution or a better solution could have come out by interaction, by collaboration, by different
Mhm.
ideas being brought to the table by different people. Even if it was a single gender team, even then people
Even
who have
then,
been tuned to think like that, or they're bringing that kind of trait to the workplace, will impact, have that kind of impact on the organization's goals also.
absolutely, absolutely. Are you? Do you see, Vishal? To you, because if the whole culture is masculine, right, in the organization, that's a sad reality, right, and that's a fact today, and sometimes toxic, right? In that culture, if a woman has to survive and thrive and grow, right? I was reading somewhere, there are instances and research says a lot of women are abandoning their natural talent of empathy, caregiving, and they are abandoning their feminism, if I call it, right? And which is not weak, which is not bad. I mean, in my parlor, and I'm sure all of you would agree, because that's a strength. They're abandoning even the way they dress up to catch up in the race, because that's what they think. That's the only way to grow. So, do you see that trend, that women are abandoning their feminism to compete in this environment? I mean, what do you see, and what impact it has on them?
See, I think there are two trends that I see, and again, being involved in some of the DI initiatives of some of the organization, I think traditionally, almost many of the women leaders I worked with,
Mhm.
a lot of them tried to emulate the male leadership, right? Whether it's from an aggression perspective, it's from driving down things in terms of this thing. It was a clear this thing. And I think what Amulya also said, when women started coming in, there was not much choice, right? It was just to emulate certain leaders and certain leadership styles. It's also not to do with the gender. It is the leadership style within an organization, and you are expected to follow this thing. Even if it's a language, it's foul language, people start to see. And I've seen very senior leaders, even in sales and very VP, senior VP, the language kind of is, you are forced to kind of be part of that culture at times, right? And I think we saw that for the last 15, 20 years. In the last 5 years, and especially in initiatives, what I've seen is, and I think from dressing up, I've seen the newer generation is able to embrace this thing. I've seen people coming in sari every day, right? And being able to kind of perform that role equally well in terms of, in fact, it fits very well within a formal and an informal setup in terms
Mhm.
of this thing. Second is being able to really embrace that emotional aspect of it. And I think that comes from your leadership, and leadership styles rather than gender is what will drive an organization. So if you see the leadership in an organization is very empathetic towards employees, they have a collaborative approach, inclusive approach. It's just not about policies on paper.
True.
Then the styles tend to be there. And one is the gender itself, and second, the organizational culture tend to drive that. And
True.
fortunately, I've been part of organization where right from our department, this thing, almost 50-60% of them were women. Now again, this is again to do with organizations where whenever you talk about diversity, the first thing is women, right? Women recruitment drive, women this thing, and that comes to your mind.
Gender.
And I think organizations which are leading and where you see a change in that is people, the mentors who are coming are male leaders who are actually setting the trend and taking and participating, which is not
So
just a guest.
default is men.
Yes.
Default is men. Right. So I think Amulya, coming to you, a very specific thing. What are the characteristics for a leader, right, in the organization? There was a very traditional concept that, and the characteristics of a leader has to be masculine, right? That is what we have been seeing,
But
right, all through, which is not true. For
no.
example, if we say introvert, right? I mean, a leader cannot be introvert, but we know some of the greatest leader in the world, they were introvert, including say Mahatma
Right.
Gandhi. I mean, he is the greatest
Right.
leader. He was
Uh,
introvert as a person, right? So there's a myth about the kind of characteristic that you need as a leader, right? And mostly masculine, and that what drives more men becoming in the leadership position, good or bad, right? And then women leaving their feminism, their own core traits, which are their strengths, to mimic that behavior. How is this leadership characteristics concept and understanding changing in the world? Because I'm sure you are in this role, in your role you are developing leaders. So what are your guidance to us?
See, there are two definitions which I like, two or three definitions which I like about leaders. Okay, so one was Azim Premji when they asked, how do you define leaders? He said only two things, action and example. So the leader has to get into action and he has to set an example. Okay. The
Okay.
other one, some management guru, they asked, "Acha, how do you define leaders? So, and what is the leader's job? So, a very plain and simple answer was the only job of leader is to make leaders. And then I am, of course, a fan of Jack Welch. So when he talked about leadership, he talked about four E's. One, of course, is energy, energize. He has to have the edge, and of course, infectious enthusiasm. So whether
Mhm.
a leader is
Very
a
nice.
male or a female, it doesn't matter. If the person is leading, he has the energy. He can see all the genders, all DEI coming in the organization, and taking everybody together is what our leaders defined as. Okay. So I feel that over the years they have changed because of coming up of a lot of female employees, a lot of
Yeah.
diverse people. So India, it's still we are nascent. But if you look at Americas or the Europe, where you have people from culture, religion, race, and whatever kind of diversity you can talk about, a leader has to be forthcoming in accepting them, accepting their views, taking everything from them. The other day, I was looking at Leena Nair. She was giving an interview with Chanel. So she is also
Channel.
a stereotype. She's broken from Unilever to now Chanel. So she was saying that as a leader, whoso is my team and down there, if I'm not ready to take feedback, then I'm not a good leader.
True.
Yeah.
True.
True.
True. And I think one
Very
of the
true.
example that I was reading somewhere that Nelson Mandela, who has been one of the greatest leader world has ever produced, right?
Mm.
And someone did ask him that,
Mm.
what makes you such a great leader?
Mm.
And he said, I learned from my father. So
Mm.
his father was into government. He was some big guys. He said he would always speak the last person to speak in a meeting, right? Whenever they have the council or the parliament, right? Or some discussion. He said he'd be the last person to speak. So the ability to listen and take feedback is, which earlier was seen as a weakness, is the strength of the leader, right? In today's world, right?
Mm.
All right. So now, uh, Simran, coming to you, and this question I have to ask you out of not these two gentlemen. How can, if these are the issues, we know what
Yeah.
can we do about it, and how can women be an ally? I mean, we have been talking about
Yeah.
gender equality, women representation, women's issue, and men should be allies, right? We have spoken enough about it.
Of course.
But let's change the card here, right? How can
Yeah.
women be a great allies? Because men cannot do it alone. If they
Of
could,
course.
they would have done it by now, and they failed, right? To miserably, right? So if they have to be helped, how can women be allies to men? What can
Yes.
they do at the workplace scenario specifically?
Right. No, absolutely. And I think the important thing to keep in mind is that, allyship as a general practice or as a general philosophy works only if all genders come together to do it.
True.
So just like we have it for women when you need male allies, similarly for men you need women allies in the system, in the organization, and it has to be done systematically.
Hmm.
Because it can't be really done. One is that it can't be done as a one-off exercise. So
True.
it's good to it can't really be done if we are viewing it as good to do. Okay, it's
Hmm.
going to have to become something which is a must have in the organization. And the first step where it will happen likely is where we instead of conforming, so going back to say the leadership styles that we were talking about, instead of conforming to a particular notion of leadership style, that women were sort of emulating those styles and promoting that particular kind of behavior pattern, appreciating the fact that there are certain qualities that come from the masculine gender, and then being vocal about it. So picking up those specific traits or those specific behavior patterns or expressions, forms of expression, that's one way that women can do really well in terms of promoting a better understanding of how we can sort of understand certain things from say a man's perspective. Again, from a policy point of view, I think somebody mentioned, I think Vishal mentioned, that there's a lot of policy that's there, but there's difference between policy and practice. So so we don't see that happening very often. So if say a woman leader has a mixed gender team and they have team members who are men, I think encouraging them also to take that kind of downtime, encouraging them also to actively take leave, encouraging them also to sort of bring their best self to work,
True.
is very, very important. So I think as women leaders, as we see growth in terms of more women coming into leadership roles, just as men, there was onus on men to understand how to say promote open dialogue in a mixed gender team.
True.
That
True.
onus is going to also lie with us as women leaders to have open dialogue with where men can also express their thoughts and emotions without the fear of being judged. Because the fear of being judged is in both places. Just as sometimes men resist even commenting on certain things because they feel that it's going to be viewed as misogynistic. What is
Mm.
misogynistic? What is the general perception of it? So I think creating a safe space, and saying that we've all got our biases. The first step is to accept it. All right, and the second step is to then
You have
start
won the battle.
becoming.
If that happens, I mean, that's
Yes.
the mother of all the issues,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Awareness is
I
the
think
biggest.
acceptance, yes,
Awareness and acceptance. I think that's a
absolutely.
tough part. That's a
Yeah.
Absolutely.
very. Have you heard,
Absolutely.
Simran, in your consulting practice, Vishal? I'll come to
Yes.
you.
Yeah.
I mean, we had resource groups, for example, right?
Yeah.
ERGs, employee resource group, or business
Yeah.
resource groups,
Yeah.
promoting certain, championing certain cause of women or men. Have you ever heard there's a ERG or BRG for men's cause? Ever any organization? Have you ever heard about it? I'm curious to know because you work with a lot of organizations.
Yeah. No, so Procter and Gamble has actually an ERG.
Oh, wow.
They've got an ERG for engagement of men, and I think as alignment with some of their product lines, for example, like Gillette is their brand, right? So they also did a lot of work in terms of through that, in terms of role modeling. What are positive role models when it comes to boys and men? Okay,
They came
how
up
do
with
they?
such beautiful ads. I mean, some of the ads that I saw, again, I'm in emotional at tears. I mean, such impactful
Correct,
ads that they came,
correct.
right? About a soldier, right? I mean, that particular ad was amazing, right?
Correct.
Okay.
So they shaped that, they started redefining what it means to be a, positive role model for the coming generation. So, and they've also done that internally. So with their ERG, they also focus on, what are the gender issues, that men are facing, what are the engagement issues that they typically face in an environment where, where there's a lot of pressure on them also to do certain things. Like, so, like when I speak about diversity, also I've seen that there are many times we often miss talking about what is called reverse discrimination. We talk about discrimination. We say that these are people who are going to come into the workplace. We have these hiring numbers when it comes to gender, but we forget that there is a very large majority of people who are of a different gender. For example, like men,
Hmm.
in a workplace. And if we are simply doing diversity as an exercise, gender diversity as an exercise to tick a box or to meet a number or to meet a metric, we are doing huge disservice even to the majority population. Okay, so I think that concept of reverse discrimination is also very less spoken about in our current scenario because our views are so, our views are so in tune in wanting to address or balance out things. And I completely understand that we want to balance out things. I would too. Like, I know that gender balance, gender equity is a huge area of concern even now. But at the same time,
So,
we need to have a sustainable approach. We can't really be looking at it from, okay, 1 year down the line, it's going to be, we'll have 50% men, 50% women at the junior level. This is not going
yeah,
to,
that's just
this kind of goal setting is not going to work in the long run.
that's faulty. That's faulty by design.
Yeah.
That's faulty by design. Actually, I would say. So, Vishal,
Yeah.
do you think that there's a debate actually, right? Sometimes you need to take some affirmative action to promote certain gender which is not represented, say women or anything else. But then somewhere there's a counter argument that, okay, what about us, right? What about men, right? You need to take care of the men also. And the leadership team or the organization are caught between this debate. So should organization be, uh, as we call it, gender neutral or gender blind? I mean, sometimes we use that word. And what impact it would have on some progressive work that already is happening, so promoting certain underrepresented talent, right? So what should be the approach? And it's a little confusing. It can be very confusing to the organizations, and Amulya, to you as HR head and many other who are into HR head positions, or talent head or business head. What stand should organization take? Should that be gender blind, gender neutral, or how to address?
Uh, I think Sanjeev, before we say how do we take a stand on this, as clearly I think the conversation, Simran, and what you were talking is, one is awareness, right, and second is the
Hmm.
approach to that. So I think one is, if there is something, some bias is happening, the awareness of what is a bias, first of all, very clearly defined in terms of, I mean, with examples and not in policy documents, right? In terms of this thing has to happen. And what do we do? So if a leader comes across this, how do you kind of, rather than saying a complaint, how do you address that in a very positive way? Has to be there. Second is the approach, because when we spoke, and I think we started this conversation about what is modern man, right? Or how has been
Hmm.
traditionally a man been like at workplace or otherwise. I
Right.
think we should start with, when we are addressing this, it's not an organizational issue, it's a societal issue at first,
Yeah.
right? And one of the
Hmm.
things we do at Meta Social here is, when we talk about CSR or social responsibility, we talk about external, underserved communities, women empowerment and things. When we talk about DI, we talk about inside, right? Can this be kind of integrated to show that this societal issues exist, and some of them may actually trickle down into an organization as well? And if it is so, these are the examples. How do you address that? And we see this is a likelihood of this issue being there. Do you see that in your teams, right? Rather than saying this exists, being able to do and showing them what's happening outside, because eventually we people or employees come from all walks of life, right? Somebody's come
True,
from
true.
rural northeast side of it, somebody like me from Goa, but it's considered modern, but from which place, a small village I came, I didn't have this exposure before I moved to Bangalore, right? So I think,
Mhm.
how do we integrate one, the internal and external? So you show societal issues and say, does this exist? Can we solve them? Second is awareness within an organization that it exists. So if you look at both, I think at large we have it, and it's not going to go away soon. So we might as well look at it. What are the key societal issues that we have in terms of gender, in terms of overall diversity as well, right? Differently abled and others within that, and not just catering to one. Because what happens sometimes is, when you talk, and especially we spoke about boys club, right? You say, oh, this is about women's drive, right? I don't need to do, I don't think this exists, this is just about getting some numbers because there's a women recruitment drive happening, I have to do, and that's about it. It's about numbers.
Yeah.
But I think we should go beyond numbers, as Simran said rightly. And it exists, but show them the societal issue first, and say some of this have come into our workplace and it's a
True,
need to
true.
address.
So I think so. There's a comment from Rupa. Rupa, if you can unmute and talk about it. I think there's a debate sometimes that if you can, Rupa, sorry to put you on spot, is sometimes we say if you are taking care of men's issue, right? It is at the cost of women empowerment or enhancing, working on gender equity, right? It's either or, which is not the case. Which is not the case. What's your expert comment, Rupa? And thanks for contributing so beautifully in the conversation. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I think from my experience, Sanjay, what I've seen is that it all begins at a zero-sum game. I've personally had situations where some men have walked up to me at the workplace and said, "Rupa, what is all this? There's so much that is going on for women. What about us? Where is the organization doing anything for us at all?" So it
Hmm.
is kind of incumbent on us as leaders of the organization to somewhere, as I think, it was very nicely stated by everybody here, is about the awareness, to create the awareness about the historical underrepresentation that has taken place. Right? I
True.
think once people start understanding about the nuances of that historical underrepresentation, then what happens is that it kind of starts making sense to them there. Otherwise, it is out of context when you're just, introducing a DI initiative just as an initiative without any context. That is when people tend to kind of think that it is all about women and they are getting left out. And it's not a zero sum game, right? If you're bringing more women into the workplace, there is going to be a lot of benefits to the teams, to the organization, and because of which everybody is gaining, including the men, right?
True.
So that is something that is very critical to be addressed at the beginning of the DI journey of the organization. Otherwise, we are always going to get stuck into the situation of why not us? Why are we not being included?
I agree. I think you beautifully said it. It's not a zero-sum game. And Amulya, I'm sure you must be confronted with this question very often, right? That,
Yeah.
what about us? And, so again, the question is it at the cost of, the supporting the cause of gender equity and taking care of women as a equal representation or, equity at the workplace? I mean, how do you deal with that argument?
So this question pops up on every 8th of March. That
8th
why
of March,
not
what is so
men's
special? Men's Day,
why
Women's
not
Day.
men's day? Why only women's day? Okay, so there's
Okay.
a constant question coming in from and luckily there are two organizations where I have worked in Samsung when I was there. The gender diversity, Vishal, was 42-68, and currently in Invest India we are almost 50-50. We
Oh,
are
wow.
50%
Okay.
female, 50% male, because we are a consulting company and an IPA, so to say. And I very well agree with Vishal that we should come down from statistics to status, real status, whether it is family or society or the organization that we are talking about. And very well resonate with what Rupa is saying, zero sum game and all. It has to trickle for us. I think it will take a lot of time, and it depends
Mm-hmm.
upon organization, their own culture, their own DNA makeup, how they are looking at this thing, in what connotation, and how much of focus they have. We still live in societies where you have too much of gap from where you see very pristine organizations where they still prefer males, and to be very brute, when the maternity leave was increased to 6 months, there are many organizations who do not want to hire females, a lot of
Yeah.
females, that too
True.
young and married, because they don't want to waste 6 months. And if they take two, which means 1 year, and two organizations where there are 6 months to 9 months of maternity leave to 3 months of paternity leave as well. So the world has to come slowly to somewhere
Slowly.
where it is equated and everybody's on the same platform. But after saying all this, the only hope is with the millennials or Gen Z, who are more aware of what kind of society they want to live in, and how they are going to transform, right? And they are the ones who are going to bring a lot of change when it comes to gender equity or DEI in true sense. So as Vishal said, when you talk about DEI karna hai, to it's always yeah, chalo females le aate hain. But who's talking about LGBT? Who's talking about handicaps? Who's talking about, sorry, specially abled people? Who's talking about other kind of diversity that exists in the society? So it's always a fight between us and them. Okay, the them becomes the other diversity group or DEI group, wo aisa hai, wo waisa hai, and us becomes all the people who are like straight, blah blah blah,
Default.
male,
Normal.
etc.
The
Yes,
normal.
and default, right? But there's a huge
Mm.
gap. So the complete mental makeup and change has to be driven by the leaders up there and say, okay, exactly, this is how it is going to come down. As culture takes time to change, this will take even more time to change. And only hope, as I said, when these new millennials or Gen Z, they are coming in, they are more open to it. And we'll see these changes happening in fast paced mode in next 10 to 15 years.
Yeah. So there's a beautiful comment from Aditi, sharing an example. Aditi, if you can unmute, would like to hear straight from you, right? What was your experience and what's the learning for all of us? If you can
Yeah,
unmute, can
sure.
you?
A very good evening after, yes, a very good evening, everyone. I was actually hosting a DI panel actually last year. That was a few days after the International Women's Day. I had a
Okay.
noted LGBTQI panelist, with me. And in the green room, we were just, discussing, and we were a bunch of women. And we talked about, how we absolutely don't want to be acknowledged on the Women's Day because it's not about flowers and chocolates and celebrating and parties around it. That's not what it is. We don't
Hmm.
want to be victimized on that particular day and be treated the way it is the rest of the year. And that at that point of time, the person told me that, do you think I enjoy talking about my community? Don't I want to feel normal and a part of the human race? Forget everything else. And please note that till we do not speak up, till we do not create that awareness, people will not take us as a part of, they will not normalize this. And at
Yeah.
that point of time, Sanjeev, it was a realization at two levels. One,
Hmm.
coming from a community which, and I suddenly felt that coming from a diversity community, I still felt in a place of privilege, and
Yeah.
how unaware and insensitive I possibly was at that point of time to not realize this. So I think there are a lot of women who talk about that we don't want to a special Women's Day, but at the same time there is a reason behind that, and that was very beautifully taught to me through that incident, and that's something it will stay for the
Absolutely.
rest of my life with me.
Thank you very much, Aditi. You are from which organization, if you can share?
Yes, I'm coming from Aeon Consulting.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much, Aditi, for sharing that beautiful story. And I think these are all
Yeah.
learning. And one thing, we do a lot of work around sensitization everyone has a learning journey, right? And I think there will be instances where, because of our being unaware, we'll be caught in a situation which is embarrassing, right? Which we are doing something wrong unintentionally, and someone points out to us, right? The way we deal with this is very important, right? First of all, we can always say, sorry, I was not aware, and take it as a learning and move on. Don't be too harsh to yourself, because you are an outcome of what your experiences are, right? And there's always a learning, right? Secondly, if I'm a man, for example, and someone has a wrong notion about men, and someone something does something wrong which is not appropriate and has a realization, I think it is okay to be kind to that person, right? And not put that person down, because that's going to be doing a disservice, and that will put people off. They won't even openly acknowledge, right? Because it's a journey that we are getting into eventually over a period, right? So Amulya, if I come to you about mental health, you touched upon a very important statistics which I read, some time back, and I was stunned to know that it's such a harsh reality that suicide rate is 3 times or to 4 times that of women, and we don't hear about it often, right? I mean, in any conversation, it's not spoken about. It is as hard as that. Now, the point that I want to raise here to all of you is about the mental health of men, right? The biggest issue, because of the traditional stereotype on men, is to have pent up feeling and have emotional issues and the anxiety, depression. And in men, it manifests in a very different way, right? I mean, it could be, we have seen examples, statistics say about they'll get to substance abuse, or will get into violence, or maybe gambling, or very different kind of the way it comes out, right? Your own pent up emotions, or maybe suicide as a very extreme case. How, as managers, as HR, as leaders, we can help the cause, right? I mean, in terms of whether it's a training, it's about providing that, expert services, counseling services, or awareness. What do you think as HR leader you would like to, or you are doing in your organization, or you would suggest that people should do to take care of mental health issues of men because of traditional stereotype? And that's a very serious
Yeah.
subject, right?
Yes. So I think it's still considered a taboo if somebody is going and talking about their mental health, right? So first and foremost, if you are a practitioner and HR leader anywhere, you have to create safe rooms for people. What is that safe
Mm-hmm.
room? It's like a room where you can come and talk about all the issues that you're facing, and it does not go out to other people.
True.
Why people, pent up people, or people who are frustrated, having actually issues, etc., they don't come and talk, is that they don't have the belief that if HR or the manager or the leader themselves will go and talk about these issues, which they don't find in 99% of the people, but only 1%. So they will laugh, or maybe they'll say, अरे वो आज आया था, वो ऐसे ऐसे बात कर रहा था. And that is where this concept of safe room is something is there. Yes, Rupa, we all, most of the organization who are developed will have an EAP. That is why you keep that EAP, Optum, etc., to work for you. But why to go outside when you can create a culture of saying that, yes, I am there to listen to you, I'm there to help you, I'm the shoulder that you can cry on, and help you with whatever you're going through, right?
Issues are.
Right?
Hmm.
Yeah. So somebody has to be there to talk about, and a huge burden on HR and the leaders to train managers and on grassroots managers and leaders themselves. So many organizations see कि यार जो भी जाके बात करते हैं ना वो सबको पता चल जाता है. And the moment it happens, and you are like branded like that, you had it. So nobody's going to come to you, and no matter if you have your EAP services, etc., you still will not believe कि यार ये HR करा रहा है, HR को तो data सब मिल जाएगा, किसने किस तरह का service लिया, and all those things, right? And that is where we default, and people have issues, whether it is female or a male, is where we default,
So
and
what
then
do we
it
do,
gets
Amulya?
into. So
Amulya, so basically, is it,
create safe room, get top from top, you start moving. So if you need to change the culture, so management people say that you just pick up the MD and their direct reportees, and then you teach about all these things and the way
True.
they are dealing with their N-1, how they are going to deal with their other N-1. If you can create a group of 4 or 5 people who are the safest people to go and talk to, whom you know, and they can be individuals, they can come in group, is what practically you can do in the organization, right? And otherwise, you have that EAP that you talked about. You have to give confidence to grassroots people. That's if you are having any kind of problem, you can come and discuss with this set of people, and they should then feel yes, whatever they discuss, they came out of it and they become the ambassadors. And slowly over the period, you will see the culture changes and things become much better. So I can only say that
Great. Yeah.
practically, you can tell your managers, your leaders, and create that safe room for the employees.
So Simran, with your
Yeah.
experience in consulting with so many organizations, what is your specific suggestion or guidance to us? What can we do to enable managers? Because that's the biggest layer, right? People
Yeah.
experience organizations through them, isn't it? You may
Yes.
create some policies at the boardroom, but
Yeah.
what an employee experience is
It's
typically
very
through the
different.
co-workers and the managers, right? So
Correct.
any specific
Correct.
advice to us about
So
mental health issues that men are facing specifically? Sorry.
no, no, no worries. So I think, you know what, so I think first thing we have to understand is we want them to deal with it, but we don't always give them the tools to deal with it. Okay. I think that again starts from the point of view of the organization understanding that there are certain tools that equip us to handle a mental health situation in the
Mm,
workplace, irrespective of gender. Okay. That's
mm,
the first part. The second is now these tools or this approach is something that has to be has to be designed in a way that is coming from a place where somebody feels, I think the idea of safe spaces or safe room, right? So their psychological safety is the first part that is created. Now, how does it happen? So I think a few years ago, I was reading about this model that I don't remember. I think one of the consulting organizations had, which sort of spoke about the traits of an inclusive manager. And the first thing it said was that an inclusive manager should have courage to own up that these are the things I have gone through. Okay. No matter how difficult it is. So having a difficult conversation with people who report to you, having a difficult, yeah, Rupa, that's right, Deloitte, having a difficult conversation with, your colleagues. Okay. Having a difficult conversation with your leader where you are speaking from the space of what your lived experience has been. Okay. Of going through or overcoming or not being able to overcome a mental
mhm.
health challenge or a wellness issue. And I think that is where that is where it becomes more
That's a
powerful,
great point.
because one it gives others the space to open up. All right, they know that
Good.
when you are opening up, they feel it's like it's a tacit permission. So tacitly you're giving them permission that this is also your chance to share and open up. Okay. And
True.
secondly, I think it also lays the foundation for authentic conversations about wellness, which men traditionally have not been taught to have. They've not been, again, not given the right tools to actually deal with those kind of conversations. So I think that kind of role modeling in an organization, especially across levels, is very, very important.
And in addition to that, Simran, we do as Enabling Bird a lot of work in employee well-being and Optum. I mean, we work with various organizations
Yeah.
that Amulya mentioned. So one of the challenge that the employee relations or employee wellness leader in the organizations, they share with us that, Sanjeev, we have the services, we have
Yeah.
best of the counselors, right, empaneled, but the usage is in single digit, very slow single digit, right? Now,
Yes.
Yeah.
the way we can see statistics is very tricky, right? We may feel, or there are very few people who need this help. Or the other way to look at this could be, there are people who need help, but there are not many who are forthcoming, right? Because of the what Amulya said is the stigma and the taboo, right? Our experience was that we did a lot of awareness session, right? And they said because of those awareness sessions, people started going and accessing those services, right? So my personal learning has been that if we create huge awareness around this and leaders taking by example, then it will encourage employees, especially men in this case, as we're talking about, because men typically don't seek help because they're taught to solve things by themselves. Be a man up, we say man up, kind of thing. that will help them to seek help and save them from a lot of mental health issues that they typically face, right? Vishal, what has been your experience? I mean, anything you want to add to that? How do we enable this
Yeah,
manager, right, in today's time?
absolutely. Absolutely, Sanjeev. I think what um, you and Simran spoke is, yeah, very key in terms of awareness, right? Because, and I think awareness from the issue itself, where uh, that addressing a mental health is a strength, it's not a weakness, right? Or looking at self-care emotion is not a feminine trait. There is a kind of education and awareness which is required,
Mm-hmm.
which is very key. And second is awareness about the issue is one aspect of it. And what is this thing? Second is awareness about the tools, right? That these are at your disposal when you want, where you
True.
want, right? And we recently did around with 50 plus CHROs in different cities. We did employee engagement dialogues, right?
Okay.
And especially in the well-being one, and I'll just take an example of one of the solutions, and we are now productizing that within our platform as well, which came in, is why I think awareness does increase the take up on this within the tools which are available within the organization, right?
True. True.
But there is still also my identity being exposed. It's the social stigma still being there. Would
Confidentiality.
somebody see me?
Confidentiality
Yeah,
is an
confidentiality of what I'm talking. Would my colleagues to know about that I'm taking some therapy or something around that, right? So I think one of the brilliant this thing, it came from one of the impact dialogues in Bangalore, is can we have anonymized use technology where it's not just the therapist, it's your colleague who has similar issues or who have gone through can come in a 3D avatar or a AI avatar where it is his or her name and your name is not exposed, and you are able to interact on not as a therapist and a kind of who's taking counseling, but you have gone through how have you made it, and those are could be your anonymous influencers inside who kind of take up that causes. Because if I go into that discussion, and it could be actually a person next door or the next floor, but you don't know, and if in a face-to-face conversation, even if it's available, you will not take it. Even if it's an online video conversation, may or may not take it, right? Because somebody else may see you doing that. But if it's an anonymous option where there is a 3D avatar, it's an actual person you are interacting with. It could be a colleague who's experienced that and
That's
he's
very
now
interesting.
help
That's
this thing.
very
It's
interesting, Vishal. The only caution I would place here is, and I'm a big fan of, as we when we talk to a lot of, corporates about well-being, Amulya. I mean, we always use for managers, especially this term called 3 Ls. That is, look, listen, and link. Look for train at least managers to look for symptoms where person is going through. Amulya is normally well groomed, always clean shaved, right, and well dressed. I can see, he's not as well groomed, right? Something is happening, right? He's not smiling enough, right? He's not putting on his camera in the Zoom calls now more. There are something is going on, and sometimes managers don't know where to intrude in personal life, right? What should they ask, what they should not ask. That's very sensitive personal space that people are going through. But training managers on, first of all, capturing those symptoms and looking for those symptoms. Second L we say is listen. Listen without a judgment, right? Listen, and that's a very difficult thing because we have a solution before even person has uttered the problem. Right, we have a solution. And especially with the HR, we have this issue of giving a solution without knowing the problem sometimes, right? I'm just saying on a lighter side, but sometimes we do that in our excitement, even with the good intent. And the most critical part is the last L is linking. And Vishal, this is where my caution is. Sometimes even I have gone through the similar situation, but my unique situation can be very different than what other person is going through. Normally, our advice is that we should not try to solve the problem based on, unless we are trained to do that, right? We can listen, but linking to the right resources is the biggest job that as a co-worker we can do, or as manager we can do, right? And we can save lives, we can save careers, we can bloom the talent, right, if we are able to do that effectively, right? So I mean, you're right. Training the managers, listening and connecting to the right resource is something which is very, 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 very important here, right, as managers, isn't it? All right, any other good practice that you have? I mean, I'm seeing there's a lot of comment in the group. Ishita, you, thank you very much. You're contributing, very extensively. She's asking, what about support groups? Maybe one sec. What about support groups along with safe space? Yes, Ishita, we spoke about, example of Procter and Gamble, where there are specific support groups, even for the men's cause with a large progressive auction. They started doing, which is wonderful, And then let me see if there's any other question that we have missed out. And experts here, you can also keep checking the chat in case we are missing out on some comment here. So I think before I move forward, there are a couple of announcements I want to make, and then I have some very interesting further conversation going on. So as we say, don't go away. We are there, but I want to make a couple of announcements. So as enabling world, we are passionate about this subject, as we say, and there are certain programs that we have put in place uh, around DI, but specifically on International Men's Day, and we do cover topics like the modern masculinity, men in depression, head on, dealing with that, Molia, as you are saying, because it's a very serious issue, not acknowledged enough, and we don't know how much sometimes people suffer, and what can we do about it. And then hair effects, there are certain statistics about, as you are saying, about suicide, but there are many other facts about the addiction and what men go through that we sensitize everyone, including men and women, everyone, and what sometimes men can go through, which are often ignored. We also talk about very beautiful new relationship of fatherhood and man. Father sometimes is taken as a very strict, like Tare Zameen Par movie, if someone would have seen, right? The father, even if they have emotions inside, but supposed to be very strict, not expressing emotion. But I think things are changing for good. What a new definition of father, new role of a father should look like. And then very serious topic we do cover about addiction. Data does say that men are more prone to addiction, whether it's in alcohol, substance abuse, smoking, or gambling, or many other things, than women. That's a reality. But how can we support them in this journey? And it's very tough. If you get addicted, very difficult to get out of that. So there are, based on our experience and research, we have put up some of these topics, which everyone, if wants to use, there's a link in the chat about the brochure. Second is, if we move on, uh, December, we are also going to have continuing our DI journey. If we go to the next page, we also have International Day of People with Disability, right? That's in December. So we are not limiting our services to just gender or LGBTQI, but we do cover a lot of sessions on people with disability, inclusion at the workplace, which is also very tough, especially in manufacturing or in services, depending on whatever industry you are into. So we do some very impactful sensitization workshop for managers, for employees, for people with disability. How can we deal with this at the workplace in particular, right? So anyone who is interested can leverage that. So I mean, we do have, you can subscribe to our channel, YouTube channel. So we do such sessions. We have done maybe about 30 of them, team years. You may not know, but on various topics like diversity, well-being, or core HR subject, and we have created a YouTube channel. So anyone who is keen to listen to such conversation, you're most welcome. There's a wealth of knowledge, experience there, and we have also, so you can scan this QR code and subscribe to our YouTube channel to gain from the various experts that we have done so far. Maybe last 3 years or so, we have done 30 plus such sessions. So this is maybe 32nd or 33rd. So please do that. We also have learning from Gen Z. So we have also created a podcast, because, and this session is going to get, broadcasted as a podcast on Spotify, the audio version of this conversation. And we have all those 30 plus, conversations as a podcast on Spotify. So that's a very relatively new channel. You can scan and subscribe to our Spotify. It's on Amazon Music, also multiple channels. We are learning this, honestly, but we are excited that, we are putting that knowledge for better reach to the employees and to HR professionals and business leaders across. So you can scan and join this channel as well as, and we call it HR Buzz, because there's a lot of buzz around different topics that we're talking about. So we are learning from Gen Z, as everyone has said. We are doing our bit around this, right? Thank you, Apurva. There'll be small time, and I'm very conscious,
Yeah.
and I promise at 4:30 we will definitely close. It will not overshoot the time. But before we do that, there's one final question to maybe all of you. Rapid fire round, not rapid fire round, but very specific. So, Amulya, in a very
Mm,
short one sentence, if you have to give an advice to a women
mm,
co-worker at the workplace,
mm,
focus is on man's issue, right?
mm,
And
mm,
the new masculinity, what would
mm.
your one sentence be?
That one sentence is that we complement each other. We are like Sur and Tal. If you have to make music, we have to come together, understand our mental makeup, intellect, emotional makeup, and we have to respect each other's ideas and contrast in whatever we do. That as simple as that. Awareness and acceptance, as we have already spoke.
Wow, wonderful. And that's a great example, Sur and Tal. That coming from a music lover, Amulya, looks like. Okay. I mean, I must say he's multi-talented. So absolutely. So Simran, if you have to give one sentence, one advice, final advice to manager, we have spoken quite a bit about it. What would that one sentence be?
I think it's very simple that, when we are when we what we expect for ourselves is what we should be starting with first. So we are looking for somebody when we are going into the workplace, for example, we're looking for somebody to see us for who we are. Okay, irrespective of gender. I think that's where we also need to start. Irrespective of gender, we should be viewing them as people, as a person with the qualities that they bring, with the attributes that they bring. Gender is just one part of their identity, and I think making that the whole and soul of who that person is. There's so much more to a person. And if we don't really see them as a complete human being or a complete package, then I think we don't have the same
Listen,
right to expect
really
that
simple.
same thing.
Absolutely. Very beautiful, summarizing that. And Vishal, I'll give you the toughest one. If you have to give, we have spoken quite a bit actually, and I'm sure a team on the call here must have been useful. I'm sure it would have been useful to all of us. It would have taken maybe one or two key learning out of it. And how can we support the cause of men, who some of them may be suffering from some issues. But if you have to give one sentence advice to men, right, especially at the workplace, right? Uh, it'll be tough to summarize, but what would that one sentence be as if in form of
Yeah.
advice, Vishal?
So, Sanjeev, I'll tweak a bit. Rather than advice from me being expert, I would say we've been referring to a lot of research before this and during this conversation, right? There's
Mm-hmm.
a amazing TED talk on power of vulnerability by
Mm-hmm.
Brené Brown, and she's done 6 years of research on shame, and she
Mm-hmm.
didn't interview men for 3 to 6 uh, years, and she thought I couldn't let go of control and how it eventually kind of panned out. I think it's a beautiful listing about really embracing vulnerability, really looking at and not looking at them from a point of view of a shame. So my suggestion would be rather than me talking, I think go watch this TED talk. It's an amazing one to change yourself and build awareness around you.
Wow, it's so beautiful. If you can put that in the chat for everyone to refer to, so that'll be great. So Trupa, thank you for doing that. So that's a beautiful thing.
Just Google that.
Amulya, uh,
Mm.
the circle is still not over, right? I mean, coming back to you, right? If you have to say one sentence to the parents, to
Mm.
maybe father or mother, right,
Mm.
about who are grooming boys, right, in the
Mm.
family,
Mm.
because someone said, I think here that it starts from the family in this society, right? And
Mm.
what would that one advice would be, one sentence? And Ashish, you're writing Bharate Nari Sab Pe Bhari. I hope it is in light
Good.
humor. I would take like that, but otherwise they're the biggest strength for us, right? Okay, so
As-
over to you.
so being parents of millennials, both my kids are millennials, so there are a lot of learning which has happened, right? So I think live and let live is what I actually have what do you say accepted, right? Because they come with so much of energy, passion, and views on so many different things that you can just not cannot pounce on them and say कि okay, हमारे समय में ऐसा होता है तो ऐसा करो, हमारे
Hmm.
पापा ऐसे बोलते थे तो ऐसा करो. Okay, so you have to just let them explore what they want. The only thing is that you can tell them that they should not go astray and they're focused on the goals that, and we just have to enable them rather than putting our ideas. So, for example, my son said, he's very good in studies, maths and science. He said, I want to do PhD in pure physics. So, other parents have stereotypical, they'll say, if you're good in maths and physics and this, why don't you try IIT? Right. So I said, no problem. Whatever makes you happy, because after 27 years of experience and all the people who are here for 30 years, 40 years, we realize after all these years, ki boss, happiness is what we are looking at the end of the day. And whatever can make you happy, you should do that. So live
I'll give
and
another
let live.
example. Amulya, Sushil is here, and I will take liberty of saying his daughter said, I want to study geography in New Zealand. Can you beat
Yeah.
it? And normal reaction would be geography in New Zealand. I mean, you want to spend so much money just to study geography? But and it's not easy. It's not easy to afford. But I mean, sorry, Sushil, I'm taking that example for learning
Yeah.
purpose. Sorry, I'm doing that. But he went ahead without a blink. Whatever way I would arrange, but he allowed her to study geography in New Zealand, and she's doing amazing work there, right? So I think that's a new parent
Yeah.
definition of parent,
Yeah.
of enabling and allowing children. So that's a beautiful. So I think I want to summarize and close this discussion. I promise that 4:30 will close. It is 4:30, but there's a poll, must be on the screen. Give your candid feedback of how did you like this conversation, from 0 to 10, and 10 being high. That is going to help us, in terms of, knowing how it is going, this conversation, useful or not useful. But I want to thank all the panelists for, first of all, being vulnerable, sharing your own stories around what is, masculinity and what can we do about it. I'm taking a lot of learnings from here, Amulya, Simran, and Vishal, and I personally learned a lot. And thank you very much to you. We would summarize this and we'll put in our LinkedIn post. We'll also put in the YouTube and the podcast. Podcast is new learning. We are learning from the Gen Zs, and we'll share with all of you. So thank you once again, and look forward to hear from you. And thank you, team. First of all, Sushil, Kalyan, Vijaya, Apurva, who have really helped in putting it all together and doing this research. But my gratitude to the audience also. I mean, amazing participation. There was almost a panel session going on. Rupa, particularly to you, and Ishita, everyone who has contributed this amazing discussion. So I hope it was useful to you. With that, we'll close the session, and be a man who can cry, be a man who doesn't hold the emotions, and seek help if you need. You don't have to don't have to be Atlas and solve all the problem yourself. So with that
Yeah.
note, let's close this session and stay safe.